The wind howled against the weathered pine boards of the small farmhouse as Nora Whitfield knelt before the empty cradle, her tears falling onto the handmade quilt she clutched against her chest. The fever had taken her baby boy just 3 days prior, leaving nothing but an emptiness that seemed to consume the very air around her. The doctor had done all he could, but in the Montana Territory of 1873, medicine was rudimentary at best, and a mother's prayers often went unanswered. "You shouldn't be alone," a deep voice said from the doorway. Nora didn't turn around. She knew who it was: Owen Galloway, the ranch hand from the neighboring property who had helped dig the small grave beneath the oak tree. His presence had been a constant since her husband Thomas had been killed by rustlers 8 months ago, leaving her alone with child and a homestead too large for one person to manage. "I'm not fit for company," she whispered, her voice raw from days of weeping. Owen's boots made a soft thud against the wooden floor as he entered the room. He was a tall man with shoulders broadened by years of hard work, sun-leathered skin, and eyes the color of the Montana sky. His hat was clutched respectfully in his hands, and his expression was one of genuine concern. "Nobody should be alone with grief like this," he said simply. "I brought some stew. Mrs. Peterson from town made it, said you need to keep up your strength." Nora finally turned to look at him, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen. At 26, she had already known more sorrow than most women twice her age. "What strength? What's the point of it now?" Owen knelt beside her, his eyes taking in the empty cradle with its hand-carved posts, a gift Thomas had made when they'd learned of the baby's coming. "The point is you're still here, Nora, and you have a right to keep living." She shook her head, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "I had so many dreams for him, so many hopes." Her fingers traced the edge of the cradle, rocking it gently out of habit. "Now there's nothing but emptiness." Owen was quiet for a long moment, the silence broken only by the wind and Nora's soft weeping. Then, with a gentleness that belied his rough exterior, he placed a calloused hand over hers. "You'll feel it again someday," he said softly, "when the time is right, when your heart's had time to heal." Nora looked up sharply, a flash of anger crossing her face. "Don't you dare offer me empty comfort, Owen Galloway. My baby is gone. My husband is gone. This cradle will remain empty." "I'm not offering empty words," he replied, unflinching in the face of her anger. "I'm offering hope." "There's a difference." She pulled her hand away. "Hope died in this room 3 days ago." "No," Owen said firmly. "A precious life ended, and that's a terrible loss, but hope doesn't die unless you bury it yourself." He stood up slowly. "The stew's in the kitchen. I'll see to your livestock before I go." As he turned to leave, Nora called after him. "Why do you keep coming back? What do you want from me?" Owen paused in the doorway, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the fading afternoon light. "Nothing," he answered honestly. "I'm just being a good neighbor." With that, he left her alone with the empty cradle and her grief, but something in his words had planted a tiny seed not of happiness, but of possibility that perhaps the future wasn't as bleak as it seemed in this terrible moment. Outside, Owen made his way to the barn, fighting his own emotions. He had admired Nora from afar even before Thomas's death, her strength, her kindness, her determination. When Thomas was killed, Owen had stepped in to help as any decent neighbor would. And when her baby came early, he'd been the one to ride 15 miles through a snowstorm to fetch the doctor. The fact that it hadn't been enough to save the child weighed on him, though he knew it wasn't his fault. The cattle needed feed, and the 2 horses required fresh water. Owen worked methodically, giving himself time to regain his composure before heading back to check on Nora. In truth, his feelings for her had grown beyond neighborly concern, but he would never speak of it, not now, perhaps not ever. She needed a friend, not another complication in her life. As dusk settled over the mountains, casting long shadows across the property, Owen finished his chores and made his way back to the house. He found Nora sitting at the kitchen table, the bowl of stew untouched before her. "You need to eat," he said, hanging his hat on a hook by the door. "I'm not hungry." Her voice was flat, emotionless. "Doesn't matter. Your body needs nourishment." He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. "I'll wait here until you take a few bites." Nora looked up, a ghost of a smile touching her lips despite her grief. "You're a stubborn man, Owen Galloway." "Runs in the family," he replied with a small shrug. Reluctantly, Nora picked up the spoon and took a bite of the stew, then another. Each mouthful seemed to require tremendous effort, but she persisted under Owen's watchful eye. "The Miller boys said they'd come by tomorrow to help with the north field," Owen informed her. "It needs plowing before the spring rains come." Nora set down her spoon. "I can't afford to pay them. They're not expecting payment. Community takes care of its own out here." She stared into the stew, watching the steam rise. "I've been thinking of selling the homestead, going back east to my sister in Boston." Owen felt as if he'd been kicked in the stomach, but he kept his expression neutral. "Is that what you want?" "I don't know what I want anymore." She pushed the bowl away. "But I know I can't stay here surrounded by ghosts." "Ghosts follow you," Owen said quietly. "I know that better than most. Running doesn't help." "What would you know about it?" Her question wasn't unkind, merely curious. Owen hesitated, then decided honesty was what she needed. "I lost my wife and daughter to cholera in '67, in Missouri before I came out west." Nora's eyes widened. "I didn't know, not something I talk about much." He rubbed his thumb across a groove in the wooden table. "But I know something about grief, about wanting to run from the memories." "Does it ever stop hurting?" she whispered. "No," he answered truthfully. "But you learn to live alongside it, and eventually you find reasons to keep going." They sat in silence as darkness enveloped the house. Finally, Owen stood. "I should head back. Mr. Johnson will be wondering where I am." "Thank you," Nora said suddenly. "For everything you've done." Owen nodded, retrieving his hat. "I'll check on you tomorrow. Try to get some sleep." As he stepped out into the cold night air, Owen looked back at the small house with its single lit window. The urge to turn around, to go back inside and promise Nora that everything would be all right, was nearly overwhelming. But he knew better than to make promises he couldn't keep. Life in the West had taught him that much. Instead, he mounted his horse and rode back toward the Johnson Ranch where he worked as foreman, his thoughts remaining with the grieving woman and the empty cradle that symbolized so much loss. Spring came slowly to the Montana territory, with patches of snow lingering in the shadows even as green shoots pushed through the earth. Nora found herself going through the motions of daily life, feeding the chickens, milking the cow, preparing simple meals she barely tasted. The community had rallied around her, with women from town bringing food and the men helping with the heavier farm work. But it was Owen who came most frequently, sometimes just to sit with her in comfortable silence as she sewed or read. One particularly fine April morning, Nora was hanging laundry when she noticed a wagon approaching. She shaded her eyes against the sun and recognized Owen driving, with an unfamiliar woman beside him. "Good morning," Owen called as he pulled the wagon to a stop. "Hope we're not intruding." "Not at all," Nora replied, wiping her hands on her apron. "Who's your companion?" The woman, middle-aged with kind eyes and silver-streaked brown hair, smiled warmly. "I'm Rebecca Quinn. My husband and I just moved to town. He's taken over the smithy from old Mr. Peterson." "Mrs. Quinn is looking for help with sewing," Owen explained, helping the woman down from the wagon. "I mentioned you're the finest seamstress in the territory." Nora felt a flush of embarrassment. "Owen exaggerates. I'm adequate at best." "Nonsense," Rebecca said, studying Nora with practiced eyes. "Those stitches on your apron are perfectly even, and Owen tells me you made all your own curtains and linens." Nora shot Owen a questioning look, but he merely shrugged with a small smile. "Mrs. Quinn needs help preparing for her daughter's wedding," Owen continued. "Thought you might be interested in the work. I can pay well," Rebecca added quickly. "And there's plenty to do the bride's dress, bridesmaids' gowns, table linens." The prospect of meaningful work, something to occupy her hands and mind, was suddenly appealing. "I'd be happy to help," Nora found herself saying. "When is the wedding?" "June," Rebecca beamed. "You're a godsend. Why don't you come into town tomorrow? We can discuss the details over tea." As Rebecca chatted about fabric and designs, Nora felt something shift inside her, not happiness exactly, but a faint stirring of purpose. When the older woman returned to the wagon, Owen lingered behind. You didn't have to find me work, Nora said quietly. You've been cooped up in this house too long, he replied. Thought a change might do you good. Nora studied his face, his honest blue eyes, the crinkles at their corners from years of squinting against the sun. Why do you care so much, Owen? He looked away, adjusting his hat. Everyone needs somebody in their corner. Then, clearing his throat, he added, besides, Mrs. Quinn really does need a seamstress. Her daughter's set on a fancy Eastern-style wedding. Before Nora could press further, Owen climbed back onto the wagon. I'll drive you into town tomorrow if you'd like. That would be nice, she agreed, surprised to find she meant it. As spring melted into summer, Nora found herself gradually re-engaging with life. The sewing work for Rebecca Quinn led to other commissions, and soon she was spending several days each week in town, mending clothes and creating new garments for the growing community. The money was a welcome addition to her meager savings, and the activity kept her mind occupied during the daylight hours. The nights were still difficult, filled with dreams of Thomas and the baby, but even those began to soften around the edges with time. Owen remained a steady presence, though his visits became less frequent as ranch work increased with the season. When he did come by, he often brought small gifts, a book from the new shipment at the general store, a jar of honey from a farmer down the valley, once even a kitten he'd rescued from drowning in a creek. What am I supposed to do with a cat? Nora had asked, even as she cradled the tiny creature against her chest. Keep each other company, Owen had replied with a wink. Besides, your grain store could use a good mouser. She named the kitten Peanut, and despite her initial protests, found comfort in its warm, purring presence on cold nights. By July, Nora had finished the last of Rebecca Quinn's wedding commissions and found herself with an unexpected reputation as the town's premier seamstress. The work had been healing in ways she hadn't anticipated, giving her not just income but connection to the community. One sweltering afternoon, Owen arrived unannounced, looking uncharacteristically nervous. I have a proposition for you, he said without preamble as Nora offered him a glass of cool water. That sounds ominous, she replied, wiping her hands on her apron. The Johnson Ranch is hosting a social next Saturday. Dance, food, music, the whole town's invited. He took a long drink of water before continuing. I was hoping you might accompany me, Nora blinked in surprise. As your friend, Owen said quickly. Just as friends, it's been almost a year since you've attended any social functions. People miss seeing you. The thought of a dance, of laughter and music and casual conversation, seemed both appealing and terrifying. I don't know, Owen. I'm not sure I'm ready. You don't have to dance if you don't want to, he assured her, but it might be good for you to get out, Mrs. Johnson's been asking about you specifically. Nora hesitated, then nodded slowly. All right, but I'll need to find something appropriate to wear. Owen's face broke into a wide smile that made something flutter in Nora's chest. I reckon the town's best seamstress can manage that challenge. The night of the social, Nora stood before her small mirror, barely recognizing the woman reflected back at her. She had repurposed one of her old dresses, a deep blue cotton that brought out the color in her eyes. Her hair, normally pulled back in a simple bun, had been arranged in soft curls around her face. It felt strange to pay attention to her appearance after so many months of merely existing. When Owen arrived to escort her, he stood speechless in the doorway. Is something wrong? Nora asked, suddenly self-conscious. No, he said quickly, finding his voice. You look beautiful is all. The compliment, simple and sincere, brought a blush to her cheeks. Thank you, you clean up rather well yourself. Indeed, Owen had traded his usual work clothes for a clean white shirt, dark vest, and his best trousers. His normally unruly brown hair was slicked back, though a rebellious lock had already fallen across his forehead. The Johnson Ranch was transformed for the occasion, with lanterns strung around the large barn and tables laden with food and drink. A small band played lively tunes as couples twirled across the makeshift dance floor. Nora Whitfield, Mrs. Johnson exclaimed, hurrying over as they arrived. It's been far too long. She embraced Nora warmly. I'm so glad Owen convinced you to come. Throughout the evening, Nora found herself welcomed back into the fold of community life. Women sought her advice on sewing projects, men respectfully inquired about the state of her farm, and several of the town's children presented her with wildflowers they'd gathered. "See, everyone's been missing you," Owen said as they sat at a table watching the dancers. "I've been missing them too," Nora admitted. "I just didn't realize it until now." As the night grew older, the band struck up a slower melody. Owen turned to Nora, his expression hopeful. "Would you care to dance? No pressure if you'd rather not." Nora hesitated, then nodded. "I'd like that." Owen led her onto the floor, placing one hand respectfully at her waist while the other held hers. They moved together easily, the steps coming back to Nora like a half-forgotten dream. "Thank you," she said softly as they danced. "For what?" "For not letting me disappear." She looked up at him, truly seeing him perhaps for the first time. "For believing I could fill that cradle again someday, even when I couldn't imagine it." Owen's eyes held hers, deep and sincere. "I meant what I said when the time is right." The moment between them stretched, charged with unspoken feelings. Then the music changed, breaking the spell, and other dancers jostled around them. The ride home under the starlit sky was quiet but comfortable. When they reached her homestead, Owen helped her down from the wagon. "I had a nice time," Nora said, standing on her porch. "Me too." Owen shuffled his feet slightly. "Maybe we could do it again sometime." "I'd like that." She smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Good night, Owen." "Good night, Nora." As she watched him drive away, Nora felt something she hadn't experienced in a very long time, a sense of anticipation for what tomorrow might bring. The following weeks brought subtle changes to Nora's relationship with Owen. Their interactions, once defined by neighborly assistance and quiet companionship in grief, began to take on a different quality. Owen started finding excuses to visit more frequently, sometimes bringing small gifts, other times simply offering his help with chores around the homestead. Nora found herself looking forward to these visits, taking extra care with her appearance and preparing special meals when she knew he was coming. They never spoke directly about the shift between them, but it hung in the air like the promise of rain on a summer horizon. By September, the harvest was in full swing. Owen had taken a week's leave from the Johnson Ranch to help Nora with her crops. They worked side by side from dawn to dusk, their bodies moving in a harmonious rhythm as they gathered the fruits of her land. On the fourth day, as the sun began its descent behind the mountains, they paused to rest beneath the shade of the oak tree, the same tree that sheltered her husband's and child's graves. Owen produced a canteen of water and offered it to Nora first. "Thank you," she said, taking a long drink before passing it back. "I couldn't have managed this harvest without you." "You underestimate yourself," Owen replied, wiping his brow. "You're one of the strongest people I know, Nora." She looked over at the two small markers, weathered now by seasons of sun and rain. "I don't feel strong most days." "That's the thing about strength," Owen said quietly. "It's not about feeling powerful, it's about continuing on when you think you can't take another step." Nora studied him, noting the lines etched around his eyes, evidence of both laughter and sorrow. "Tell me about your wife," she said suddenly. "You never speak of her." Owen was quiet for so long that Nora thought he might not answer. Finally, he took a deep breath. "Her name was Sarah. We grew up together in a small town outside of St. Louis. Married young, I was 20, she was 18. He picked up a blade of grass, twisting it between his fingers as he continued. She was full of life, always laughing, always finding the bright side of things. When our daughter came along, I thought my heart might burst from happiness." "What was your daughter's name?" Nora asked gently. "Lily." A smile touched his lips. She had her mother's spirit, always curious, always asking questions. "How old was she when?" 4. Owen's voice grew rough. "The cholera came through fast, took half the town, including both of them, within a week." Nora reached out, covering his hand with hers. "I'm sorry, Owen." "It was a long time ago," he said, though the pain in his eyes suggested otherwise. "After they were gone, I couldn't stay there. Every street, every building held memories, so I headed west, worked my way through Colorado, Wyoming, finally ended up here." "Do you ever regret leaving?" Owen considered the question. I regret running from the pain. It followed me anyway, but I don't regret coming here. His eyes met hers. Not anymore. The moment stretched between them, laden with unspoken meaning. Then Nora squeezed his hand and stood up. We should finish before we lose the light. They worked until darkness made it impossible to continue, speaking little but sharing a new understanding, two people who had known profound loss, yet somehow found their way back to the possibility of happiness. The harvest celebration in town marked the official end of the growing season. Main Street was decorated with corn stalks and pumpkins, and tables groaned under the weight of the community's collective bounty. Children played games while adults caught up on news and gossip, everyone enjoying the respite before winter's work began. Nora, dressed in a rust-colored skirt and cream blouse of her own making, found herself the center of attention as women admired her handiwork and placed orders for winter clothing. She had officially established herself as the town's seamstress, with a small but growing business. "You've become quite the entrepreneur," Owen remarked, appearing at her side with 2 plates of food. "Here, you should eat something." "Thank you." She accepted the plate gratefully. "I've been so busy talking I haven't had a chance to try anything." They found a quiet spot away from the main festivities, sitting on a bench outside the newly built schoolhouse. "I've been thinking," Owen said as they ate. "Johnson's giving me a parcel of land as part of my wages this year, good soil, about 50 acres with access to the creek." "That's wonderful," Nora replied. "You've earned it after all your years with him." Owen nodded, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "I'm planning to build a house there, nothing fancy at first, just something solid to start with." "You'll make a fine homesteader," Nora said sincerely. "Though I imagine the Johnsons will miss having you on their property." "I'll still help out when needed," Owen explained, "but it's time I had something of my own again." He hesitated, then added, "I was hoping. That is, I wondered if you might help me with some ideas for the house. Being a woman, you'd know better about the practicalities of a kitchen and such." Nora smiled at his obvious discomfort. "I'd be happy to help, Owen." Relief washed over his features. "Thank you. Maybe you could come see the land sometime, get a feel for what might work best. I'd like that." As winter settled over the valley, bringing short days and long, cold nights, Nora found herself spending more time at Owen's land than at her own homestead. What had begun as occasional visits to offer advice on his building plans had evolved into regular involvement in the creation of his home. Owen had hired 2 experienced carpenters from town, but he did much of the work himself, with Nora often by his side. She would bring picnic lunches and hot coffee, help hold boards in place, or simply offer encouragement when the work became frustrating. By December, the basic structure was complete, a simple but sturdy 2-bedroom house with a large kitchen and a covered porch that wrapped around 2 sides. Owen had insisted on extra windows to let in the light, and a stone fireplace that dominated the main room. "It's coming along beautifully," Nora said one afternoon as they stood in what would become the kitchen. Snow fell gently outside, creating a peaceful backdrop to their conversation. "Couldn't have done it without your input," Owen replied, his breath visible in the still unheated space. "Though I'm not sure about this pantry. Seems awful big for a bachelor." Nora ran her hand along the rough-hewn shelf. "You won't always be a bachelor, I imagine. Someday you'll want to fill this home with a family." Owen's eyes found hers. "That would depend on the woman, I suppose." The air between them seemed to still, heavy with implication. Nora felt her heartbeat quicken as Owen took a step closer. "Nora," he began, his voice low and serious, "I've been wanting to tell you something for a while now." Before he could continue, the front door burst open, bringing with it a gust of cold air and the 2 carpenters returning from their lunch break. "Sorry we're late, Mr. Galloway," called the older one, shaking snow from his hat. "Storm's picking up out there. Might want to get Mrs. Whitfield home before the roads become impassable." The moment broken, Owen nodded. "You're right, we should head back." The ride to Nora's homestead was quiet, both of them wrapped in their own thoughts as the snow fell more heavily around them. By the time they arrived, the storm had intensified into a proper blizzard. "You can't go back out in this," Nora said as Owen helped her down from the wagon. It's too dangerous. Owen looked uncertain. I don't want to impose. Don't be ridiculous. You can sleep in the spare room. She led the way into the house, grateful for the warmth of the fire she'd banked before leaving that morning. It's not the first time a storm has stranded someone here. As the evening progressed, they settled into a comfortable domesticity, preparing dinner together, sharing stories over the meal, and finally sitting before the fire with cups of hot cider. Outside, the wind howled and snow piled against the windows, but inside was warmth and companionship. I've been thinking about selling my homestead, Nora said suddenly, breaking a comfortable silence. Owen looked up sharply. You're not still considering Boston, are you? No, she assured him, but this place is too big for just me and the memories. She glanced toward the room where the empty cradle still stood. Sometimes they're overwhelming. I understand that, Owen said softly. Where would you go? I'm not sure yet, but my sewing business is doing well enough that I could afford a small place in town. She stared into the fire. Somewhere to start fresh, Owen nodded slowly. Starting fresh has its merits. They fell silent again, the crackling fire and howling wind the only sounds in the cozy room. Finally, Owen cleared his throat. Nora, about what I was trying to say earlier at the house, she met his gaze, her heart fluttering. Yes, I care for you, he said simply. More than as a friend or neighbor, I have for some time now. Nora felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the fire. I care for you too, Owen. I don't want to rush you, he continued earnestly. I know you're still healing, but I wanted you to know how I feel. Nora considered his words and the man before her. In the year since her baby's death, Owen had been her constant support, never pushing, always respecting her grief, yet gently encouraging her return to life. She realized with sudden clarity that somewhere along the way, without her even noticing, she had fallen in love with him. You've never rushed me, she said softly. You've been exactly what I needed, exactly when I needed it. Owen's expression lightened with hope. So you're not opposed to the idea of us together? Not opposed at all, Nora replied, a smile spreading across her face. In fact, I think I'd like that very much. Owen moved to sit beside her on the sofa, taking her hand in his. May I kiss you, Nora? Instead of answering, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his, a gentle, questioning kiss that quickly deepened as Owen's arms came around her. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. I've wanted to do that for a very long time, Owen admitted, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. Me too, Nora confessed. I just wasn't ready to admit it to myself. They spent the rest of the evening talking about possibilities for themselves, for the future. When fatigue finally overtook them, Owen reluctantly retired to the spare room, but not before one more lingering kiss at Nora's bedroom door. Good night, she whispered against his lips. Good night, he replied, his eyes full of promise. Sleep well. For the first time in many months, Nora did exactly that. The blizzard continued for 3 days, effectively stranding Owen at Nora's homestead. What might have been an awkward situation instead became a precious opportunity, a chance to explore their new relationship away from the prying eyes of the community. They cooked together, read to each other by the fire, and talked for hours about their pasts and their hopes for the future. On the third night, as they stood washing dishes side by side, Owen broached a subject that had clearly been on his mind. I've been thinking about what you said regarding selling your homestead, he began cautiously, and I have a proposition. Nora set down the plate she was drying. What kind of proposition? My new house is on good land with plenty of room for expansion. He turned to face her fully. What if you didn't sell? What if you leased your property instead? The Miller family has been looking for additional grazing land and your fields would be perfect. That's an interesting thought, Nora said slowly, but where would I live? Owen took a deep breath. With me, as my wife. The dish towel slipped from Nora's fingers as she stared at him in shock. Owen, are you proposing? Not very elegantly, it seems, he said with a nervous laugh. But yes, I am. He took her hands in his. I love you, Nora. I think I have almost since we met, though I fought against it out of respect for your marriage and your grief. Owen, you don't have to answer right away, he hurried to add. I know it's sudden. We've only just acknowledged our feelings for each other, but I want you to know that my intentions are serious." Nora looked into his earnest face and felt a surge of affection so strong it almost overwhelmed her. "It is sudden," she agreed, "but not unreasonable. We've known each other for over a year, spent countless hours together." Hope flickered in Owen's eyes. "So you'll consider it?" "I will," she promised, "but I need a little time." "Take all the time you need," he assured her, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. "I'm not going anywhere." When the roads finally cleared enough for travel, Owen reluctantly prepared to return to his own lodgings at the Johnson Ranch. As they stood on Nora's porch saying goodbye, she reached a decision. "I have something for you," she said, disappearing inside only to return moments later with a small package wrapped in brown paper. Owen accepted it curiously. "What's this?" "Open it," she encouraged. Inside was a hand-stitched quilt square, beautifully embroidered with the image of a house surrounded by flowers and trees. "It's our first quilt square," Nora explained, her cheeks pink with emotion, "for the home we'll build together." Owen's face broke into a wide smile as he understood her meaning. "You're saying yes." "I'm saying yes," she confirmed. "I love you, Owen Galloway, and I would be honored to be your wife." He gathered her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in his excitement. When he set her down, his expression grew more serious. "I promise to be a good husband to you, Nora. I may not be perfect, but I'll spend every day trying to make you happy." "I know you will," she said softly, "and I'll do the same for you." Their kiss sealed the promise, a new beginning for two hearts that had known profound loss yet found their way back to love. News of their engagement spread quickly through the small community, met with general approval and good wishes. Nora's friends in town immediately began planning a wedding celebration, while the men offered their help in completing Owen's house before the ceremony. The wedding date was set for April 15, 1874, when the worst of winter would be past, but before the demanding work of spring planting began. This gave them 4 months to prepare, time that passed in a whirlwind of activity. Owen threw himself into finishing the house, adding special touches he knew would please Nora, built-in shelving for her books, a spacious sewing room with excellent natural light, and a covered walkway connecting the main house to the barn so she wouldn't have to trudge through snow in winter. Nora, meanwhile, divided her time between her sewing business, preparing her homestead for lease to the Millers, and creating items for their new home together. She sewed curtains and linens, crafted a wedding quilt incorporating the square she'd given Owen, and made her own wedding dress, a simple but elegant creation of ivory satin with lace at the collar and cuffs. Through it all, their relationship deepened. They learned each other's habits and preferences, had their first disagreements and reconciliations, and discovered the joy of planning a shared future. One evening in late March, as they sat on the porch of Owen's nearly completed house, watching the sunset paint the mountains in hues of gold and purple, Owen turned to Nora with an unusually serious expression. "There's something I need to ask you," he began, taking her hand in his. "That sounds ominous," she replied, echoing his words from months before. A smile flickered across his face before he continued. "It's about children. We've never really discussed it directly." Nora felt her heart quicken. "What about them?" "I know losing your son was devastating," Owen said gently, "and I would understand completely if you felt you couldn't bear to risk that kind of pain again." She was silent for a moment, her mind returning to the empty cradle that still sat in the spare room of her homestead, a reminder of what had been lost and what might have been. "When you found me crying that day," she said finally, "and told me I would fill that cradle again someday, I thought you were offering empty comfort. I couldn't imagine ever wanting another child, ever being willing to make myself that vulnerable again." "And now?" Owen asked, his voice soft. Nora looked out at the land before them, the home they were building together, the future they were creating. "Now I think you were right," she admitted. "Not as a replacement for the baby I lost, but as part of the new life we're making." Relief washed over Owen's features. "So you'd want children?" "With me, I would," she said, squeezing his hand. "Very much so, though I admit the thought terrifies me sometimes." Me too, he confessed. After losing Lily, well, I understand the fear. They sat with that shared understanding, the knowledge that loving always carried the risk of loss, yet choosing to love anyway. We'll face it together, Owen said finally, whatever comes. Together, Nora agreed, leaning her head against his shoulder as the last light of day faded from the sky. Their wedding day dawned clear and mild, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of early spring flowers. The ceremony was held in the town's newly built church, packed to capacity with friends and neighbors. Nora, radiant in her handmade gown, walked down the aisle alone, her eyes fixed on Owen waiting for her at the altar. The service was simple but heartfelt, with vows they had written themselves, promises not just of love and fidelity, but of understanding each other's grief and supporting each other's healing. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the church erupted in cheers as Owen pulled Nora into a kiss that left her breathless. The celebration afterward was held at their new home, with tables set up in the yard and music provided by local musicians. As the sun began to set, Owen led Nora away from the festivities to a quiet spot beneath an apple tree just beginning to bud. "Happy?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist. "More than I ever thought possible again," she replied honestly, reaching up to touch his face. "Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I'd given up on myself." "Never," he promised, kissing her forehead. "You're stuck with me now, Mrs. Galloway." Nora smiled at her new name. "I can think of worse fates." As they rejoined their guests, Nora looked around at the home they had created together, the house built with Owen's hands, the garden she had planned, the friends and neighbors who had supported them both through dark times. It wasn't the life she had once envisioned for herself, but it was beautiful in its own way, precious, because she had almost lost the capacity to imagine any future at all. Later that night, after the guests had departed and they were finally alone, Owen carried Nora across the threshold of their home, now truly theirs, filled with the warmth of celebration and promise. Their coming together as husband and wife was tender and passionate, a physical expression of the love that had grown between them through months of shared work and deepening understanding. Afterward, as they lay entwined in the quiet darkness, Nora whispered, "I never thought I could be this happy again." "Me neither," Owen admitted, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You've given me back something I thought was gone forever, hope for the future." "We gave it to each other," she corrected gently, "and that's how we'll keep it alive." Spring melted into summer, and summer gave way to fall. The Galloway homestead prospered under their joint care, with Owen's knowledge of cattle and horses complementing Nora's skill at gardening and household management. Her sewing business continued to thrive, with a dedicated workspace in their home allowing her to take on more commissions while still maintaining the household. They settled into the rhythms of married life with surprising ease, as if they had always been meant to move through the world together. There were adjustments. Of course, Owen had to learn not to leave his muddy boots in the middle of the floor, while Nora discovered that her husband preferred to sleep with the window open even on chilly nights. But these small frictions only served to deepen their appreciation for each other. By the time winter approached again, Nora began to suspect what the persistent morning sickness and missed monthly cycles confirmed: she was with child. The knowledge brought both joy and terror. She kept the news to herself for several weeks, trying to reconcile her excitement with the fear that history might repeat itself. One evening, as they sat before the fire after dinner, Owen noticed her unusual quietness. "Something on your mind, love? You've been distracted lately." Nora took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I'm pregnant, Owen." His face registered shock, then pure joy as he moved to kneel before her chair, taking her hands in his. "A baby, really?" She nodded, tears filling her eyes. "Due in early summer, the doctor says." "Oh, Nora," Owen breathed, pressing his forehead against their joined hands. "That's wonderful news." "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "So scared of losing this one too." Owen looked up, his expression serious. "I know, and I can't promise it won't happen. But I can promise you won't face it alone, whatever comes." He placed a gentle hand on her still flat stomach. This little one has us both fighting for them. As her pregnancy progressed, Nora found herself oscillating between excitement and anxiety. She took every precaution, resting more, eating carefully, limiting her sewing work as her belly grew. Owen was attentive to the point of hovering, which sometimes frustrated her but more often reassured her that she wasn't facing this journey alone. The community rallied around them once again, with women bringing herbal teas for morning sickness and offering advice, while men helped Owen prepare a nursery in their home. When the cradle was mentioned, Nora made a difficult decision. "I want to use Thomas's cradle," she told Owen one evening. "It feels right somehow, like honoring him and our first baby while welcoming this new life." Owen studied her face carefully. "Are you sure? We could have a new one made." "I'm sure," she said firmly. "It's a beautiful cradle made with love. Our baby should sleep in it." So Owen brought the cradle from Nora's old homestead, carefully cleaning and reinforcing it before placing it in the corner of their bedroom. Nora sewed new bedding for it, a quilt in soft yellows and greens that would suit either a boy or girl. As spring arrived and Nora's due date approached, her anxiety increased. She began having nightmares about her first baby's death, waking in tears that Owen would gently wipe away as he held her through the dark hours. "Talk to me," he encouraged during one such episode. "Tell me what you're afraid of." "Everything," she confessed, "that something will go wrong with the birth, that the baby will get sick like before, that I won't be a good mother." "You already are a good mother," Owen assured her. "The way you're caring for yourself, the love you already have for this child, those are the marks of a good mother." He placed his hand on her rounded belly, feeling the strong kicks of their active baby. "And we'll have Dr. Williams this time. He's much more experienced than the doctor you had before." Nora nodded, trying to take comfort in his words. "I just want everything to be okay." "So do I," Owen said softly, "more than anything." Their baby, a daughter they named Emma Sarah Galloway, arrived on a perfect June morning after a relatively easy labor. Dr. Williams pronounced her healthy and strong, with good color and a robust cry. Nora, exhausted but radiant, couldn't stop staring at the tiny, perfect face. "She looks like you," Owen said in wonder, gently touching their daughter's wispy dark hair. "She has your nose, but your chin," Nora replied with a tired smile. "And your lungs, judging by that cry." Owen laughed, tears of joy streaming unashamedly down his face. "She's perfect." That night, after Dr. Williams had gone and Owen had finally been convinced to get some rest himself, Nora sat in the rocking chair next to the cradle, watching her daughter sleep. The moonlight streaming through the window illuminated the scene so different from that terrible day almost 2 years ago when Owen had found her weeping over an empty cradle. "You were right," she whispered, though Owen was asleep across the room. "I filled it again." In that moment, gazing at her daughter's peaceful face, Nora felt the last lingering shadow lift from her heart. The grief would always be part of her, a quiet ache for the husband and child she had lost, but it no longer defined her. This new life with Owen, with Emma, in this home they had built together was real and precious and full of possibility. Carefully, so as not to wake the baby, Nora leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to Emma's forehead. "Sleep well, my love," she murmured. "Your mama and papa are right here." Then she climbed into bed beside Owen, who stirred just enough to wrap an arm around her, pulling her close against his warmth. "Everything okay?" he mumbled, half asleep. "Everything's perfect," Nora assured him, nestling into his embrace. "Go back to sleep." As she drifted towards sleep herself, Nora reflected on the journey that had brought her here, from devastating loss to unexpected love, from an empty cradle to one filled with new life and hope. The path had not been easy or straight, but standing at its current juncture, she couldn't help but be grateful for every step that had led to this moment of quiet joy. The years that followed brought changes, both expected and surprising, to the Galloway family. Emma grew into a spirited, curious child with her father's blue eyes and her mother's gentle heart. When she was 3, she was joined by a brother, Thomas Owen, named for the father Emma would never know and the father who had chosen to love her as his own. Nora's sewing business expanded beyond garments to include quilts that became sought after throughout the territory, featuring designs inspired by the Montana landscape and their family story. Owen's skill with horses led to a successful side business breeding and training stock for neighboring ranches. Together, they built a life rich in love and community, weathering the inevitable hardships of frontier life with the strength they found in each other. Their home became a gathering place, known for its warm hospitality and Nora's excellent cooking. On Emma's 5th birthday, as the extended family and neighbors celebrated with a picnic under the apple tree Owen had planted when they first built the house, Nora found a quiet moment to stand alone on the porch, watching her husband twirl their laughing daughter while their son toddled after them. The sight filled her heart almost to bursting. This family they had created together, this life they had built from the ashes of their respective losses. She thought of that day long ago when Owen had found her at her lowest point and offered not empty sympathy but the gentle promise of future happiness. "You'll fill it again someday," he had said of the empty cradle, and he had been right in more ways than one. Not just with children, though Emma and Thomas were precious beyond measure, but with purpose, with joy, with the steady, sustaining love they had found in each other. As if sensing her thoughts, Owen looked up and caught her eye across the yard. His smile, the same warm, honest smile that had first begun to heal her broken heart, told her he was thinking the same thing. Some promises, Nora reflected as she went to join her family, were meant to be kept. And some cradles, once empty, were meant to be filled again with new dreams, new life, and enduring love.